Bajo el negro manto del humo se abre un valle de la ansiedad. Ya se distingue bloque y concreto, la hierba santa en las cajas de fab. En este valle de asfalto y plomo se come el chile, tortilla y sal. Y en la laguna de Xochimilco yo me imagino un águila real. Por la salida de Zaragoza, por esas casas de muro gris, entre los patios, los tendederos, la ropa nueva de este país se va forjando con mano y obra, piedra con piedra la construcción. De la provincia me traje un sueño a la laguna, ciudad del sol. Diente con diente, sangre con sangre, valle de plomo, máquina errante, locos de asfalto, lluvia de polvo, truenos de la comisión del soborno. Poco te asusta, poco te gusta, todo lo tragas y todo lo culpas. Piedra con piedra, dato con dato, ¿cuál es el código de tu epitafio? Piedras de un lago muerto se oye el sollozo de una ciudad. Otra colonia más que se extiende, otra familia sin sueldo ni hogar. Pero la mata sí sigue dando, cada uno lucha para ganar. Todos gozamos la vida un rato, tránsito pasa que viene y va. Sangre con sangre, nadie responde por estas calles. En la distancia todos los cables hacen un nido de sombras viajantes. Y en las esquinas todos los muertos, las coladeras te roban los sueños. Lluvia de llantos de los millones, de sus encantos y frustraciones.
Hey y'all, Kelly Moody here. Welcome to the Ground Shots podcast, a podcast that explores our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling. It's been a second since I put a new podcast episode out. It's just been a busy summer, teaching classes, and juggling a lot of things I've been trying to do and take care of in life. And I have a queue of episodes to put out right now, and this is one of them. I'm coming at you from a hot day in Paonia, Colorado. Summer is now fully here. It took quite a while for summer to emerge out of this wonderfully wet and rainy spring that we had, which made my ecology classes that I've taught so far out on the Grand Mesa here near where I am really wonderful, because I had a lot of good flowers and water, and the weather was just perfect for us to be out there. So a lot of those have happened thus far this year, but I do have a little more left, and I still could potentially take new students in the class. We have probably room for like 1 or 2 more people, so if you are curious about it, this next one is a shorter class, a 4 to 5 day class, in early August on the Grand Mesa. And then my friend Nikki, who is a wonderful teacher who's been on the podcast a bunch of times, Nikki Hill, she's teaching an in-person class for an entire week after mine in the same location just about. So if you've been curious about studying with either of us, there's still a little space in our in-person classes, and you don't have to be like living in Western Colorado where we're teaching them to find what we're going to teach relevant. It's going to be place-based, but it's also going to be universal plant ID, universal curiosity, universal like skills for applying landscape awareness to many places for both of us, for either class you would take with us. So I've had students come from Florida, from northern New Mexico, from Oregon, and I'm having someone come from England for my next one. Like, there's local people, there's people from far away that have been coming, and everyone's given feedback that it feels like that what we have done together would be applicable outside of this particular place. This place is a tool to teach about the stories here, but also teach about how what we can see here on the landscape is translatable. And usually, no matter where you go, there's some plant that is related to some plant somewhere else. That's how ecologies work, you know? So I invite you to check it out. I'll put the link in the show notes. Probably the last time I'm going to shout these classes out for the season, because we're just gearing up to actually start getting the final plans made for those classes. And it's good to have our final student number down pat, but it's still possible to sign up if you are interested. And the website to sign up through the nonprofit that we're teaching through, Groundwork, is layinggroundwork.org, and I will put that in the show notes. That's been the main focus of my summer, but I'm also living on a certified organic medicinal herb farm, and I've been helping them out some, and making lots of medicine from the farm when I have time, and I am gearing up to do a medicine sale soon, so pay attention to that. I haven't done one in almost 2 years, and they were popular events in the past when I would do these pop-up sales on my website, and I will be shouting it out on social media and stuff when it comes up. But I like to do them occasionally for short windows of time, and like make them medicine, small batch medicine. I make what I make available for y'all. Yeah, and usually it's just a window that I release it, and then I shut down the store and then ship everything. And it's I've been trying to do one again for a little while, and now I think it's actually going to happen, because I am in such an abundant place and I'm not driving around everywhere right now. I'm trying not to anyways. Doing all my nomad stuff. I'm trying to stick closer in a little bit this season, although there's still some tendrils that might send me out some other places, but like it's easier to make all this medicine and share it with you guys while being able to focus on it here. And there'll be some plants from the farm here in the medicine, but also some well-crafted stuff with reciprocity in mind, of course, in the medicine. And there'll be some old favorites that I used to make through Ground Shots Herbs, and also some new stuff. So pay attention to that, and I will be shouting that out, of course, in my email newsletter, Substack, when that comes up as well, so Instagram, Facebook. So yeah, stay tuned to that. And a little bit more housekeeping before I get into just a quick introduction to Sylvia, who I conversated with in this episode. I'm really excited to share with y'all. Couple things besides the class that I have left this season that's scheduled through Groundwork. Well, there also might be some more stuff that I'm going to announce, but we're kind of finalizing those things right now, including a high attending class here regionally with a friend of mine. We're going to co-teach that in September, but we're finalizing the dates right now and the details, but just stay tuned for that announcement as well, because I don't teach that class very often at all, and there'll be a couple cool elements to it. If you want to come tan a sheepskin with me and a friend who does a lot of tanning as well in person. I'll be shouting out more details on that on the next podcast episode and on social media when we get it finalized. But that's another thing to look out for. Other housekeeping. I'm going to be announcing too another kind of online course experience soon that will be in the fall and include collaborators, and so I'm not going to give much detail on that quite yet, and but just look out for that. And I'm also going to be teaching, I think, at least one off class that's just a one-time class with me too, and I'm about to schedule that and announce it as well. So there's a couple online things coming up in the fall. I have another summer field ecology class in person that's coming up, and also what I've been focusing on lately too is getting all my photography straight. I keep getting inquiries from people to like do photography for them, so that's something I've been focusing on too. But as far as announcing to y'all, the podcast audience, about what kind of photo type journalism documentation work I'm doing, and how you could access that is something I'm still kind of unfolding and figuring out. Also more housekeeping offerings, things that I'm conjuring right now. I've opened some space in my books for consultation if people are interested in having me consult in some kind of work they do that might be related to the ecology work that I do. And I've had a few dates doing that recently, and it's been really fun to brainstorm with people how they could improve their land-based event or organization, how to network or like get connections to better run the project that they're doing. And also been doing a little bit of online mentorship as well around ecological awareness and tending land and all the practical and sort of social cultural pieces that I think are important to look at when learning plants, learning ecology, working with landscapes. That's been something that I've been mentoring a couple people on recently. So if you are interested in that, you can email me and ask about it. I've had some stuff up on my website where how people could like book time with me, but also I might be shifting that around to make it easier for people to do that. But you can just email me if you're curious about like whether your interest or your project would be relevant to me and talking to me about it, and getting advice or mentorship or consulting in those realms. And other than that, ways you can support the podcast, super important right now, as I am only doing this because of y'all supporting it, and it still doesn't pay me after all these years, and it would be wonderful if it started to, so that I could really dig into it more. And I have so many people I want to share with you and so many stories I want to share with you as well, and it just takes so much time, and support is what makes this happen. So ways to do that is, one, through my Substack, groundshots.substack.com. Been writing there more and sharing. You can subscribe as a paid subscriber there. You can do a free subscription as well, but paid really actually helps support this work and my time, so many hours of my time that I've put in the past and in the present to do this. All the research, music, talking with people, getting it all arranged, the time it takes editing. I still have a Patreon for the podcast, and it's called patreon.com/ofsedgeandsalt. That will also be in the show notes, all these links. I don't put a lot of new stuff on Patreon now because I want to phase it out eventually, but I still accept, people supporting through that avenue if they would like. And then when you do that, you get access to like everything that I've posted on there over a 5-year period when I really was running it. So it is a big library of stuff to access there. And you can support that way. Also, you can just give donations through PayPal and Venmo, Cash App. All the links for that kind of thing are in the show notes as well. Those really, really help. I also have a Buy Me a Coffee link in my Instagram links page. There's a bunch of ways that you can do that and support me, and support the podcast entity in itself, and keeping it even just out in the world, costs money. So anything you have to offer is super helpful and wonderful, and I just thank you so much for all the people that have been supporting this project over the years. It's just what's made this possible, so I really, really am grateful for it. It's hard to remember exactly the first time I met Sylvia, but I believe it was last spring at the Buckeye Gathering. She was teaching, I think it was like a rewilding your nervous system type class, or some kind of decolonizing the nervous system in type class at Buckeye, and then I saw her again at another skills gathering last summer, and then we got to actually connect more deeply at that gathering. Sylvia Poareo is a gentle Curandera whose work is rooted in guiding and supporting each individual in their own liberation within collective healing. Informed by the Chicano experience and growing up as an orphan in SoCal, Southern California, her life was an initiation into deep trust in and reliance on spirit or creator. Connecting deeply into the heart, to the cosmos and nature as a pathway to healing, she recognizes the profound wisdom, resilience, and fortitude we carry in our bones. She supports ancestral remembrance and remembering parts of ourselves, our innate humanity, and cultures of origin as a path to truth, healing, and wholeness. Her greatest wisdom is drawn from her experience as an orphan and a mother, learning to repair, reclaim, and liberate herself to give and sustain life for her children and with less trauma that was passed down to her. She supports this reclamation through connecting within our inner child, held within ancestral, natural, and spiritual guidance. She weaves neuroscience, somatic practices with ancient wisdom, spiritual mothering, and soul retrieval to address the pain of rejection, abandonment, anxiety, depression, and grief. Her approach is informed by her journeys with inner bonding, Mexican traditional medicine practices, nature connection, social work, activism, and somatic exercises. Sylvia is well known for her gentle, compassionate, yet clear and effective way of bringing many elements together to support our integration. Much of this work is held in community, and the spiritual community she supports is deeply rooted in equality and liberation from systems of harm. She supports inclusion, accountability, and spiritual work without spiritual bypassing. And she embraces inner work for individual and collective liberation, knowing as we reclaim profound love within, we are meant to share it. And Sylvia has a deep understanding of generational trauma, mental illness, and navigating the system, family incarceration, foster care, etc., and how systematic and racial injustices create environments of inequity in our communities. I'm excited to share this conversation with y'all. Me and Sylvia sat down and had almost a couple hour conversation, edited down just a tiny bit for this episode. And we went to a lot of places in this. I asked her a lot of questions about the effects of oppression and patriarchy on our interpersonal relations, dynamics, healing, something I've been thinking a lot about in my own life right now, what layers are actually outside of like interpersonal dynamics that are affecting how they play out and how they move and dance, and really getting some perspective from her on that I wanted to share with y'all. So definitely talked about like trauma and somatics and how the body holds things and how ancestral trauma can come through to our bodies today, and just the responsibility of the person to tend to the self too, and all of it. Like, we have a collective work to do. We have work that we need to be doing with others in community. It's a big emphasis that she puts on this in this conversation, but we still ultimately have the responsibility of doing the tending to our own selves and self-love in order to be able to share it with others in an even way, in a clear way. We both have gone to ancestral skills gatherings, so we do get into what that means for Sylvia, what that experience has been like, and pros and cons, and how maybe those spaces could be more accessible and relevant for people of color, non-white folks that don't often feel fully comfortable coming to these gatherings. There are certain reasons for that, and it's not as if it's necessarily intentional all the time in those spaces. But just something we reflect on a bit in this conversation. And you know, her being a Mexican woman from LA and doing this healing work, and she still comes to these gatherings and brings her kids. Just she has her own perspective on it all. So that was something fun to talk to her about and like insightful. Thank you, Leela Downs, for letting us use music in this podcast episode. Leela Downs is a super popular musician in Latin America, and I've had other podcast guests ask me about featuring her music before, and I didn't hear a word in the past when I asked her, and this time I tried again, and she responded saying, yeah, use some of my music. So I'm really just grateful to be able to put some of her music in here because Sylvia was requesting that. I always try to ask my guests, like, I have things that I could use from people that I love and music that I love, but if you have a tendril that you want me to follow for music in your episode, I will follow it and we'll see what happens. So that is what happened here. So at the end of the episode, I will credit what songs we played, and of course you can find any musician I feature on the podcast, a link to their music in some form and how you can support them in the show notes. So let's go ahead and get to this conversation with Sylvia. Well, maybe we could start by, you could introduce yourself and what your work is, and
to a little bit of how your life story has influenced what this work is in the world. And then we'll go from there and dive into other pieces of that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I work as a folk counselor. I've started saying or curandera, and my emphasis is the spiritual, emotional, and trauma healing. And I've been practicing this way for over 25 years. And it's really about self-reclamation and liberation from all the constructs, and a returning to really knowing how to hold and tend ourself. And that's, really the primary focus of my, like when I'm working with people, they come to me to address whatever is going on with them emotionally or spiritually or their personal history. And then I weave in the nature connection. I weave in the Mexican traditional medicine like limpia or soul retrieval. But it always begins with somebody's story, their personal history, their human experience here. And how we can help them to hold on to themselves, to reclaim their inner child. I use the inner child metaphor a lot. And it turns out, I went to UCLA and I got my master's in social work, and I have all the training as a licensed therapist, but I actually left it years ago. I didn't go that route because it didn't resonate for me. All that academic language didn't resonate. And what resonated was the inner child language and the spiritual connection, bringing in whatever your spirituality is, but bringing it in for your healing. And back then it was kind of radical. It's kind of wild that I didn't choose the therapist path and the insurance, billing insurance path. And it was harder, but it didn't feel right for me, because what really resonated for me in my own healing, because I had grown up in foster care and I had emancipated as a foster youth, meaning you're homeless, but I had, applied to college. I had gotten scholarships for college, but if I didn't, I would have been homeless. And anyway, the inner child work, this process is called inner bonding that I've kind of adapted to bring in all the other pieces. It's the thing that really resonated for me. So I followed that, and essentially it's all about following our heart. And so I followed mine, and I kept following my heart out of the system into this more traditional path. And, I didn't even know I was being a curandera until other people started telling me that's what I was doing. And then I began to study with a teacher. But, and so my history, I grew up in foster care when I was, my mom had lost 2 children and her husband tragically in a car accident. They were hit by a drunk driver. And I was kind of born into the landscape of her unresolved grief, which kind of unfolded into psychosis. And so I experienced a lot of, chaos and abuse. And but by the time I was 6, I was placed in foster care. And then that was a whole other journey of being moved over 20 times. So my new term is, I just say I was a vagabond orphan. And it was really hard, and there were really challenging things about it. And that's all of what, enables me to be able to really hold space for people coming from a lot of places and all the spaces, because we're all dealing with, abandonment and disconnection and fragmentation. But it also gives me that eye into marginalized community. When you're a foster youth, you're with all of the other forgotten children, and the outcomes of foster youth are, really, really heartbreaking. They're, primarily, it's a high percentage of foster youth who become incarcerated, trafficked, or homeless. So it's, that's always I'm always kind of bridging these different worlds, and it's because I came from that experience of marginalization. And but I work with everybody, and I like to kind of try to bring us all together. So is that a good summary?
And you grew up in Southern California, you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all over Los Angeles.
Big urban area.
Yeah. And then as a social worker, I did work as a social worker in South LA and Southeast LA for many years, which, also deepened my sense of racial and social justice.
Yeah.
So I would say that in terms of describing my work, it is important to name that it has a very strong social and racial justice and decolonization emphasis.
Mm-hmm. I'm surprised. Well, I guess maybe I'm not surprised, but I am curious as to why, like, being a traditional counselor wouldn't be possible to include elements of what you do. Because I guess meeting you, I'm like, oh, I just assumed you were some form of counselor, like that is recognized by the state or national, whatever, but I guess some of those things don't fit into the paradigm of what that is, which is unfortunate because like it's just so needed, for it to be more accepted. But yeah, I would have thought you would have been a traditional counselor.
Well, it's actually shifting. When I had to make the choice, and actually I can at any point, because I have the degree, I can at any point go back and become a traditional therapist.
Mm.
But I am certified as a pastoral counselor or a transpersonal counselor, as in spiritual counselor.
Mm.
So, and that just now I have, my a little community, and it's not dogmatic. It's just, but I do cultivate spiritual community. So it makes the most sense for me to work in that way. But now it is shifting. Now there's people who can be a licensed clinical social worker and curandera and do Reiki and blah, blah, blah. Like a lot has shifted, but I made my decision 25 years ago. And I would still, even in this current landscape, I would still choose to not work within the system because it's too, it doesn't work for me. I am really migratory in my way. I really, I really don't resonate with a lot of the things that you have to do as a therapist, even today. But there is more blending.
Okay, cool.
Was it back then? I mean, now if you say inner child now, it's like, oh yeah, inner child, oh, shadow work, oh, ancestral healing, right? All these things, they're all super trendy now. They were not trendy when I was when I was practicing them. I always had to qualify the term inner child, and I had to like really help people to not think of it like a Saturday Night Live skit, you know. So things have shifted.
Yeah, parts work, and Instagram is this place I swear I constantly see memes and posts, therapy posts, and it's all this inner child this and child this and attachment style this, and it's like if people are thinking about it more as we realize we need to be thinking about these things more, but it is intense to see what directions people take this sometimes, for sure. And maybe some directions not in a good way, but some in a good way. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it reinforces people's sense of victimhood, which keeps them in a wounded place instead of kind of looking at what does it look like to reparent and reclaim myself. And, sometimes it's really helpful and brings up awareness for people, but maybe they need a little additional support to bring it in a deep way. There's a lot of ways that we can self whatever, label or ourself, but it's all kind of coming from our head. And if we're not grounded in our heart and our body, then it's just a lot of head orientation, which is essentially, a lot of the programming that we're trying to unpack.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still really good pieces. I think like it's everything that is occurring has beautiful, bright notes. And I feel like that's a bright note of social media, even though I don't really love a lot about social media.
Yeah. Yeah. What's being fed, even if you get to see and communicate with the people that you want to be there, they're filling in all the space in between with like some of this stuff, this programming of you need to look like this, or you need to think like this, or feel like this. And it's hard to decipher in the body what's real sometimes in it all. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately, is like, wow, it is constant every day that you have to decide what's real. And you don't always know for sure, but like, yeah, and then how that must feel in the somatic body, like sifting through all that. I mean, that's, I think, part of the navigating trauma is like realizing, things happen. Some of them are like from someone else doing something to you, and sometimes it's like, oh, it was a car accident, or something that's sort of not about another human involved. And there's a lot around like having to understand how to be grounded in reality, and how to sort out like, you're, as a child, adults to show you what's reality, and then you have to decide, okay, like, what do I decide, as an autonomous adult. Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah, there's a deep amount of programming, and everyone is functioning out of domination culture. So, there's a lot of survival based shaming, judging, controlling, right? When we're in our essence, like I always like to take it back to like a toddler or a baby, and before all those constructs get put on anyone, right? Like we can see, if you think about a baby or a toddler right now, you can imagine like, wow, this little light, this, little heart open, belly out, because they feel safe, right? And that's really who we are. That's who we are. But then because our parents and our systems are all functioning out of conquest or domination culture, then it's like, the oppression comes. And then we normalize to that. We think, oh, all of these expectations are who I'm supposed to be. But we're not supposed to be that. We're actually supposed to be who we came in as. So yeah, as adults with lifetimes of being around all the people who have normalized to, all the names, conquest, domination, colonization, right? Then yeah, the question really begins to be like, who are we if we're not trying to survive in this landscape?
Yeah.
But the answer is not that hard, because you can look at every single child.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, this has been something I've been thinking about so much, like really seeing in my own life and other people's lives how our personal ecologies with one another are so affected by our culture, the culture of domination, white supremacy, and settler colonialism, and how the ecologies outside of human ecologies are also affected by that. And it is like this whole thing of trying to figure out what's reality all the time, or like the way that the culture itself can be gaslighting, and like, no, you feel like that we feel drawn to be back and as that innocent child, like we want that, like that's what's really going to help us be in connection in a healthy way with each other in the living world outside of humans. And also realizing that we're not ever really separate from that anyways, but then everything around us in the dominant culture is telling us we're wrong for wanting that. There's all these things like that we get told, or that other people tell us that have been a part of it and they've been oppressed by it and they have been thoroughly damaged by it. And so they want, of course, they wouldn't want other it's interesting how people who are really damaged by it don't want other people to necessarily be free from it.
Yeah,
That's
right.
hard too.
Yeah. Well, that's Stockholm syndrome, and everybody pretty much in this society, right? Like identifies with the oppressor. That's what Stockholm syndrome is for anyone who's listening and doesn't know. It's just, you know, it's when we are uh, imprisoned, jailed, and whatever. This comes from a research study, right? And there's power in identifying with the oppressor. There's safety. If we're not holding on to ourselves and we're not, kind of really being thoughtful and aware of what narratives we're following, then I mean we can be very unsafe. It can feel very unsafe. So our survival self, our wounded self, um, will definitely identify with the oppressor. Definitely, send messages of go along to get along, and who are you and who do you think you are if you, try to be something other, because there's survival in going along. So everyone is navigating this landscape. I've been thinking about this because, one of the things I went into a bathroom recently, I was at this like sweet little folk dancing thing. And I went into the bathroom, and in the bathroom, it was like, you are enough, you are loved, and on the one hand, it's like, oh, okay, this is Ashland, how cute, right? And then, but on the other hand, like I really look at all of these things, and a lot of those narratives that we just mentioned on social media is like, these are all just signs of how much we have been fed lies about ourselves, that we have to, and even like under patriarchy and everything, that we have to like fight for our humanity. These things are just normal. These things, like to know your worth, to know you belong, to know you have unique gifts that are needed and that you don't have to have all the answers. Those are just our birthrights. That is just what a child comes in with if they're not trying to navigate this, messed up society. And so like a way that I would articulate that even more is like with my daughter, who I really, tried to like raise in a very unplugged way, and all of my children, but this is relating to my daughter, right? And then there's this song, and I mean, some of your listeners are not going to know this song, but it's just, I'll just say it's called All About That Bass, and it's by Megan Trainor. Um and it's like it's a liberation song. It's a song that's like claiming like it's great to be curvy, right? Like it's, and we've heard various iterations of this, but I really was like, wow, if I have my daughter listen to that song, I'm going to be teaching her that there's something wrong with being curvy, because she has never had the concept, because I've raised her unplugged. She's never had the concept that there's anything wrong to be with being curvy. So it's just, I feel like even the way we're all just trying to desperately say we are enough is actually really pointing to like, wait, why do we have to keep saying we are enough, right? We're swimming in some major lies.
I was thinking a lot about I've been thinking a lot about somatics the past couple years, and in the past I haven't paid as much attention to that, and like until I had some more intense life events happen the past couple years that like made me have to pay attention to it. And I'm still navigating that, like really watching my inner landscape and like realizing all the experiences I've had that affect the way that inner landscape is acting. And I guess I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to we start having experiences when we're children. Some of them are really beautiful, loving, nurturing experiences, and some of them can be really traumatic. And I think about like these things have big effects on us. Sometimes we don't even realize. And I think the people who are raising children don't sometimes realize, like some people do, but like what affects, like what can happen. Someone described it to me like it's possible that a traumatic experience can create a deep groove in almost rock that is so hard to like flatten again, and then everything's going to be channeled through that after that. And then there's practices that can happen with the right tools or community or, you know, like assistance that can make those grooves be more like in the sand or in water, where they don't reverberate into our lives over time in the same way. But of course we don't, as a culture, we obviously, because all these things are so backwards and we don't necessarily have those tools built into our culture. So a lot of us are walking around with a lot of those deep grooves in rock. And I guess, yeah, maybe I'm curious if you could speak to this idea, I guess, and like how as an adult realizing this, that say I've got those deep grooves, you've got those deep grooves, many of us have these deep grooves, what now? I didn't have the tools in the past to help them be more like sand or water, you know, and now it's like it feels almost impossible sometimes to shift that groove. Like I can be aware of the fact that it's there, but with somatics, maybe you could speak a little bit to defining what that is too, because it's a word thrown around a lot these days, and the like interest in this more in this generation. But like in somatics, it's like yeah, this like whole other this part of us outside the head, you know, is, I guess there's that book, The Body Keeps the Scores, a way to speak to it. I forget the name of that author, but like that our bodies hold all these memories, and it's not that we can think our way out of it, you know. Yeah, I don't know if that's, yeah, maybe you could speak to all this stuff. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I love the way that person helped you to frame it as a canyon, and that's really beautiful, natural way to frame it. Yeah, what Bessel van der Kolk is the one who wrote that book. It's a really great book. It's also a very heavy book, you know. But essentially what it's talking about, and what a lot of, you know, people looking at trauma, who are also looking at like our animal body, are noticing is that, you know, retelling the story. Now, I believe that it's important to have your story be held, but because that's how you're going to be able to recognize the rock, right? To conceptualize it. But what happens in our body when we're navigating those traumatic moments is what is actually needs to be healed. So when it's like, again, if you think of that 2-year-old and their heart is open and their belly's out, because that's like our stance, you know, we're like, I'm safe here. I'm here to be the flower that I am, the part of the ecosystem that I am, right? No shame. Then, you know, lots of things happen, and it's not all big trauma. It's a lot of little oppressions. And slowly we get shamed. If you think about someone walking up to that child and saying, "What are you doing? What are you thinking? Who do you think you are?" Right? The child's body is going to contract. The shoulders are going to hunch. The vital organs are going to want to, like, you know, be tucked away. That kind of, if you think about a fetal position, right? Why do we go into a fetal position? To protect the soft underbelly. So all of this, and then there's, you know, fight, flight, freeze, hormonal activation. There's all this that happens in our body. So when that, you know, in Mexican traditional medicine, we might say susto, like fright, right? So we have to treat what got activated in the body. We have to help that to unwind, in addition to just trying to unwind the story. Because if your body isn't, and that's all somatics is, it's just saying we need to look at the body. We need to address what's going on in the body, because for a very long time, not surprisingly, because, you know, capitalism, colonization are all mental constructs. They're all head orientation. They're disembodied ways of being. So it's like, whoa, rocket science, we need to focus on the body. Ancestral peoples, indigenous peoples have always focused on the body. That's what Mexican traditional medicine is we're looking at the body, what happened in the body, what do we need to clear out of the body. But so now somatics is referring to that, is referring to, oh, the remembering, which is great, that we need to look at the body. If all of that got activated when the child got scared, frightened, threatened, violated, oppressed in all those, little small shaming and judging ways, then the body is doing a lot of contracting, a lot of protecting, a lot of holding patterns. And that rock canyon is the survival pattern. It's the survival pattern. And Daniel Siegel, who talks about, the high road or the low road, right? Like in our neural pathways. So we can have neural pathways that are all up in clear thinking in our prefrontal cortex, or we can have the low road. And the low road is the neural pathways are focused on survival, and they're in the brainstem. So we're reacting, we're hypervigilant. We're in fight, flight, freeze all the time. And that's what PTSD is a great example of that, but also, intense anxiety, depression are also examples of that. So all of that is because our body is trying to survive our external landscape. And so in order to be able to reclaim ourselves as adults, that's when we can say, okay, and this is what I, support people to do. And what I did myself, right? When I was 18, I didn't have parents, and and I had all kinds of grievances about how I had grown up. But ultimately, it became like, oh, I'm the adult now, and it's up to me to be the one to be my inner mother, inner father. And that was why I chose that, why I continued on that path of that healing model, because it was the most empowering. Because when we're adults, no matter, what your circumstances, that is the time when, on an internal level, if we're still hoping that somebody else out there is going to give us the love we needed or deserved or help us to unwind. Now we need to do everything with support, not as an island, but right here in our own, self-presence. If we're not showing up for ourselves to hold and reclaim ourselves, then we're abandoning ourselves. And so then it's like that little wounded child is, has all their hurts, and there's no one there to help them. And, and in this society, and, part of the programming of this society is that, we think somebody else needs to do that. We need to hand our inner child to someone else to do that. So, I mean, the short answer of like, what do we do, with our canyons is we hold on to ourselves. We say, I want responsibility to heal this. It's not an individualist thing. It's just a recognition that the minute we do that, the minute I say, okay, maybe I feel like they're judging me, maybe I feel wounded by that person's lack of interest in me or abandonment of me. If I am not holding on to myself and saying, here, I'm here, honey, to inside on an inner level. If I'm not holding on to myself, then I'm just that contracted in body and hurt emotionally little child, right? Like very, very vulnerable. But when we bring our own self-presence online, we kind of can put our arms around ourselves, then just, something shifts right there. It's like, oh, somebody cares. It's actually me. I'm the one that can actually care the best, But in this process that I do, it's also not just me. It's me as facilitator or vessel of, the, spirit, creator, well ancestors, the, all of life, the natural world, all our relations, right? Like I'm bringing all of that in to help me. So, because my programmed mind doesn't know my program mind actually only saw all those parental models or religious models or school models who really were largely enacting different forms of oppression and to survive all the things, right? Domination. I like to just say domination because that's the name for all of it. And so we need to kind of open back out in the way of our ancestors. This, again, is not actually anything to put on like a new concept. This is actually a very old concept. Like I like to think about, well, when that, well, I'm not going to derail in that way. I'll just say that what I do is I hold myself, I say, I've got you. And I really don't know how to love myself. This is what I did as an emancipated foster youth. I don't know how to love myself. I didn't have parents. If anything, I had like a very abusive system raising me. And so I had to like learn about that. And I did that by opening to my spiritual connection, opening to love in all forms, opening to well ancestors, and bringing memories, right? And I feel like this is intergenerational, ancestral blood and bone memories of, what is loving, what would be loving, what's the truth about me, right? So when I work with clients and they're repeating all of the lies of their parents or the culture, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough that's one of those things written on the bathroom wall, like that the things on the wall are trying to respond to. But why do we think we're not good enough? Ancestral people, if you look outside of this culture, of Western culture, they are not feeling that. People who are held by their community, who are in connection with the natural world, who are allowed and to be that child that grows and is celebrated for their unique gifts. Now there's always family strife, and I never mean to like paint like this idyllic picture, but that kind of core shame of I'm not good enough, I really witnessed is just what's created in this culture. So, but anyway, we're all navigating that. So let's say I have that programming, right? That's the part of the rock, right? I mean, it's very, very steep in this culture. But so then I hold myself and I open to my guidance, or I'm supporting someone else. For simplicity, I'm just using myself because I've done all this work. That's why I can help people. But I hold myself and I could try to be like, you're okay from my small mind, but my small mind is programmed, right? So instead, I open to what would love say? What does love, as in creation, show me every single day? Like, certainly the birds are good enough. Certainly the animals, the trees, the plants, the butterflies, everyone's good enough, right? But so the process of holding myself isn't just me by myself, it's me opening out. And that's the place that we reparent ourselves from.
Yeah, I feel like the culture of dominance does ask us to disconnect from the body, the ecosystem of the body. And I mean, you have to, right? To survive, you have to ignore your body in order to make the money you need to make, or like put yourself through things that you have to put yourself through in order to like be in the dominant culture. And it's almost like a radical act to just remember you have a body and be back in it, and like and look at it again, like you said, and talk to yourself, show up for yourself as an embodied person, like saying, hey, okay, I have a body and it's got a lot of grooves. Some are deep, some are shallow. And what are those grooves telling me? And like, yeah, just feel things again, even if they're hard. I've been thinking about that a lot, like the kind of gift of feeling and no one can really take away, even if they can tell you that you shouldn't feel this way or that, or the bigger culture tells us that we shouldn't feel this or that. It's almost like even just like owning that we feel a lot of things, and that we're giving ourselves permission to feel them. I've been sitting with that a lot lately, of like, what a gift to be able to feel deep love and deep grief, and recognize what it is, where it's coming from, and what it is, to be a body experiencing these things, rather than be told I have to push away love and push away grief, or push away like the complexity of being a body in the world. And not be in connection to the past, ancestors, and like the very mechanized like view of the world that is what allows us to do capitalism and to exploit people and the land and all the things, is like founded on this idea that things do work without animism and without life and without flow and connection in that way. But it can only go for so long, because like we know the reality is that life isn't like that. It isn't without that spirit and without the body, in a way. And we're fighting against that, like that force.
Yeah. The inner child is our feeling self. And that's why it is so important to take time to drop into the body and notice all those things and really honor anything you're feeling. Is always information. It's always, whether it's wounded and we can explore it, what's going on? What am I telling myself, right? And or, what's that longing in your heart? I always like to remember that pre-conquest cultures are primarily in their heart and body, right? Like all of these, I once read this like great little whatever anthropologist paper, and it just really showed like how linear thinking is so not kind of innately human. I mean, it is, it's human, it's a tool, but where people naturally reside is in their heart and body. And that's what we're having to reclaim. But and that is exactly everything you just said, is the reclamation process, is just not discounting our feelings, not discounting our, inner knowing, and learning, and also, letting ourselves rest, right? Because if we're not resting, if we're in that grind in any way, and even skills people can get into the grind, because everybody, gets into this productivity culture. It's just swimming all around us. And, I know for myself, I still struggle with like giving myself permission to just go beyond land. It feels indulgent. For me, it's usually around survivor skill, around feeling like, oh, so many people are struggling. But then when I go and I give myself that time and I let myself rest, which I do more than most, because it's actually what I teach. But that's always when, right? We enter that dream time. And I don't know if you know who Tricia Hersey, who wrote Rest is Resistance, is, the NAP ministry. She has the NAP ministry on Instagram. And anyway, she calls it the dream space. And I really like that. Where, the fact is, if we're not resting, if we're on that hamster wheel, then we can't actually really know what wants to move through us. We can't actually really know what part of the ecosystem we are here to support. So it's just an extremely important part. And it can seem like it's so hard to do in this culture, to just let yourself be, to let yourself rest. But that is also a really important piece to tuning into your feelings, to really being able to hear under the layers, under the many layers, what's going on inside of you.
Yeah, those things just come in when there's when there's space there, getting off the computer and all that stuff too. Because even if you're like, I'm off, I'm not working right now, and you're on your phone, you're still being fed a lot of the stories, information, other people's lives, things that are influencing you and how you think about your own life and your own work and your own relationships to things. But as soon as we like rest, really, like not just rest, oh, I'm not like being paid anything right now, but just like rest psychically, I guess. There's a lot of space for things to come in. I feel like for me, like as an artist or like as a person that does a lot of like thinking philosophically, I guess, even, or like putting ideas together in certain ways, like there's all these layers for me. But like I've remembered many times in the past when I get out and I'm separate from the grind, I guess, a lot of stuff comes to me, whether it is an idea about the way I'm observing something outside of me functioning, or playing together, like something that I didn't have the space to like put together before, or a connection within myself to whether it's a memory that I haven't allowed myself to come in, or yeah, like this just time and space to allow whatever bubbles forth to just show itself. I think people go and put themselves into like Vipassana 10-day meditations and things like that to force that time to occur where they can like sort through things like that. Maybe that's helpful for some people. I know for me that Vipassana is really intense, and like I guess it's not supposed to be easy either, but where I guess not supposed to, but isn't always easy in the world we live in to do that kind of thing. But yeah, I think it's interesting how there's ways that we're trying to do that, but it's still hard to. The idea of taking the time is hard. I feel guilty too. I want to go on a walk this summer, and I'm also like, but I should probably work and make money, but I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's because all of those things are not monetized, right? Anything that's earth related is not, other than like a class, but just being in relationship with Mother Earth does not feed empire. So, it's like being a mother, oh my goodness, when I left my well-paying job to be home with my children, it was very demoralizing because mothering, gardening, tending land, being on land, none of that serves empire, so none of it has value in capitalist society. But I want to say something about the Vipassana. And I mean, I do feel that everybody gets to follow their heart and, what feels right for their soul. And we're such a diverse, two-legged species. And we really do need to think of ourselves just like the rest of our animal siblings, like just filling different niches, right? Niches. And but what we can do with our head, our disembodied way of being, is we can try to do self-care from what I call a teenager self. So there's like two different ways, right? There's like the teenager that says, you gotta do your yoga, you gotta light your candles, you gotta check the boxes, right? And it's that voice, it's that efforting voice. It also could just be our inner colonizer self. And it's you gotta do the Vipassana, you gotta get the right poses, right? There's a very competition, achievement, survival, like scrappy energy to it. Okay. And that's what we might call our ego or wounded self, programmed mind. So that, we can do all kinds of things from that place, and it's not actually going to land in a nourishing way for us. Versus if we come like from that self-reclamation, like I'm holding myself. What do you feel like doing, on an inner level, like an inner dialogue with your feeling self, with your body? Because that's what we're doing when we're reclaiming, is we're reconnecting to our whole being. And so you can, if you came in lovingly and said, what would feel loving to you? What would feel good? What are you needing from me? Right? That's a different energy than the way that a lot of people run themselves on. Like, it's kind of like grind self-care, and then it's like, oh, my self-care is not working. Well, that's because your self-care doesn't have self-presence. It's not actually tending and loving yourself, because self-care can just be this right here. How are you doing, honey? How are you feeling? What are you needing today? How can I make sure that, you know, I'm not abandoning you? That's self-care. So it's not about the doing. We get confused that it's about the doing. Now, it could be that you have that little dialogue and your soul says, I love Vipassana. Let's go do some hardcore Vipassana. Okay, whatever, right? Like, that could be your truth. Okay, so it's not demonizing any of the self-care. It's just focusing on, like, what part of you, your wounded part or your loving reclaiming part, that's gonna do that. It changes, the whole experience of it.
Yeah, I don't think that some of those practices are for everybody. Like, I tried to do a Vipassana one time, and I dated someone years ago who was really into it and has done it like 10 times. And he felt like it helped his life a lot. I mean, at least there's a lot of things that he was able to look at because of doing Vipassana, and it worked for him in a way. And then there's other things I noticed that I was like, huh, this is curious to me. Like, and sometimes he was aware of it, like the standard he would even hold himself, having done it so many times, like, oh, that he's supposed to, it's supposed to be a certain experience, or there's like this sense of like, well, I need to graduate further this time and be even more practiced or be better at it. And like, I guess the heart of the practices it's themselves are kind of like, no, like, you can't, like, your attachment to somehow it fixing you is also something you're going to be looking at. But I know for me, I mean, maybe I would try it again, but it definitely was something that maybe I just didn't have it wasn't the right time and place, but it was not what worked for me. What's worked for me more is moving meditation, or like meditation or work that isn't, I mean, I don't know. Vipassana, everybody has different feelings about it, and some people really, really
Well,
love it, you know.
yeah, and it's not really about Vipassana. It's just about finding what's right for you
Yeah.
by tuning into yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I did remember feeling shame that I didn't finish one time, that I disappointed my partner at the time. I disappointed myself somehow, that I didn't push through the discomfort and pain, and like how intense it was for me psychologically, like, and that was something I had to like look at after a while and realize that then that is okay for me to feel too, like, but it doesn't mean that I am not good enough, or whatever that narrative is that you're saying, like, even that may and reinforce that.
Yeah, that's your inner colonizer. That's the programming.
Yeah.
This is white supremacy. This is the culture of whiteness too. I mean, even the little bit of, I'm hearing in the way you're, just that little story, the sense of superiority, like, oh, if you've done Vipassana, you're superior in some way, or you're right. You're doing the right thing, right? These are all layers of whiteness, right? So we've got the competition, achievement, capitalism, and we've got the superiority and rightness and there's one way, if you just look at the whole list of features of white supremacy, right? So that's all of the kind of programming that in that moment you're like battling against. You're feeling it because it's the sea you're swimming in, but you're bringing truth to it. You're bringing your truth. That's what we all have to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. Whiteness as this construct, but it's used as an identity, right? Like for hierarchy, creating hierarchy over other people and over land and all the things. Like it's used as a tool for hierarchy. And some people can't quite see that, I mean, even people who try to see that can't quite see it all the way either. But yeah, I think this idea that there's somebody better than someone else, yeah, it asks us to look at that for sure.
Yeah. And again, it's just a person. And, a lot of this is like the difference between having an external sense of self-worth or an internal sense of self-worth, right? So if our sense of self-worth, which is what is cultivated in this society, is external, I mean, this is, capitalism, all the marketing, right? Marketing 101, make you feel like you don't have enough and then sell you that thing that you need, right? That's marketing 101. We're all swimming in that. So it's all just part of survival to say like, oh, am I, do I have what I need? Am I fitting in? Right? It's just all survival based. So anytime we're engaging in hierarchy, we're engaging in external self-worth, which is essentially handing our inner child to something outside of us to be okay. Versus if we're holding on to ourselves, if we're grounded, rooted in the earth and in our innate rightness, like our innate sense of belonging, that's, that has to come to us from connection with the earth, connection with creator, and whatever that is for you, well, ancestors. Those are all the places where we return to internal self-worth. So a lot of, anyway, does that, I don't know if you're trying, if that makes sense. But so it's just helpful to kind of say, am I giving the constructs outside of me the value, or am I dropping in to my connection with all of life?
There's a comfort to be able to come back to that over and over, be real, like to be reminded, oh yeah, right. Everything's changing all the time. Relationships come and go. Bonds happen, fissures happen, but like the baseline of like connection to land, it's like a comforting kind of reminder of that yourself and that and the land around us can always be in a relationship. Like somebody might cut your favorite tree down, you might be really sad, but like what that tree is a part of and you as a part of it too, it's just like something that's, we were told to like step away from that, and we forget that, we get wrapped up into all these other relational things, but then it's still like at the end of the day you're on the earth crying. And it's like this thing that sort of dissolve, you can be reminded that all of that stuff can, like the things that we're experiencing, we're having to work through, whatever it all is, can be dissolved into like that baseline. But it's not always easy to stay there, right? To stay in that reminder. So it's just
Yeah, no, and that's why it's extremely countercultural. That's why I really want to be specific and say we don't do this by ourselves. Like all of my work is in community. I have circles, I have, gatherings, I have retreats. Like, I'll work one-on-one with people, but I'm always putting them into some community context or supporting their community context, because we can't unpack it all by ourselves. It's very crazy making in this society. But also the land piece, right? Like not everyone has that deep land connection. I mean, I work with, most of my life, primarily urban people. And then especially like in Southeast LA, people who are very marginalized and disconnected from earth, and everyone can find their way no matter where you are. once it's named, you know, even if you're tending a planter box, it is true that everyone can find their way to remembering that, because all you have to do is look around. But I do think it's important to name that even that, you know, isn't always easy. It's not always that easy, like safe landing, because if you're living in a concrete area and you know, there isn't even a healthy grocery store, right? And you're surrounded by freeways. Like, this is the landscape of South LA, Southeast LA. You're surrounded by freeways. And now there's amazing gardeners, you know, Ron Finley and people like really, really holding down the Mother Earth connection. So I don't want to, like, you know, what's the word, you know, um, deny the sovereignty and the capacity of people everywhere, because people are resilient. But I'm just naming that, yeah, coming back to resting and knowing your rightness in Mother Earth, that's, you know, that's something we also have to carve out for ourselves to reclaim. And it's a lot of reclaiming.
Yeah, and it's still like thinking about a city like LA, you know, I mean, there's an element of it that it's like the culture of domination is the landscape is so dictated by it. And at the same time, so many people love places like that for the beauty of all of the movement, you know. In some of my classes, I ask people to define what is wild or wildness to them. And I've also been in other facilitated scenarios where that question gets asked, and there's been people in some of those spaces that are from cities or live in cities, and they're like, you know, I feel like the city is wild. Because if you want to define this, what wild is in any way you want to define it, like, to them, the like magic of all of that culture and movement and like exchange, and there's elements of it that is wild to them. So that's really curious, you know.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's a great reminder, because that's actually something I find myself saying or like pointing to when I'm at gatherings. Is like, okay, nature connection is human connection, human diversity. You know, there's a lot of, I mean, obviously there's a lot of whiteness in the gatherings. Um, but also like there is this kind of like, if you're not on land, you know, you're a terrible human being, you know, and it's like, wow. But, you know, when I go to Southern California, you know, I moved to Oregon because it was like my inner child's longing to be near these trees. But when I go back, I'm like, ah, breath of fresh air. Look at all these different humans. And they're, for the most part, getting along. Like, that is right. That I resonate with that. That is wild. That is the wild. That is so beautiful. And all of the creativity that comes forth when people have to find the wild in themselves, like dance, right? Or art. And yeah. So I love that. I love that you named that. And I think it's, you know, and that's another piece of like really bringing inclusion to these wilderness spaces, right? With will like and or whatever we want to call those nature spaces, right? Land, right? Access to land, right? That's also why inclusion is so important, because we're not experiencing full nature connection if we're only experiencing one branch of the species, you know? Like, if we're not inviting the richness of all different types of people from all different experiences.
Yeah.
And I'm
Go ahead.
Well, I just want to clarify, because, you know, everyone hears things, and saying something like that can be triggering to people who go to gatherings that are white spaces. And I'm definitely not implying that anybody is wanting to be exclusive. It's just that it's what's happened because of, you know, because of capitalism and hierarchy, and who has the privilege and the time to be on land. And so inclusion efforts need to be, you know, specific. Like they need to be intentional. They're not going to happen naturally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't want to say that either, because that's not very emergent. I mean, they can happen naturally, but in many spaces, there needs to be an eye to it.
Mm-hmm. That was one of the questions I wanted to bring up, because we met originally, and so you kind of already started speaking to this, but we met originally at one of these ancestral skills gatherings, and I've seen you at a couple of them since. And those are mainly the spaces we physically in person interacted, I guess, and all over the West, different ones. And these spaces, I guess ancestral skills is one definition for it. There's been other names people use for these kind of festivals or like gatherings where people come together and share skills that vary depending on where you are and who's there and how they want to facilitate it. And some of these gatherings have a wider array of like what skills are being shared, and some are pretty specific, like Stone Age or whatever. And as someone who's also interested in sociology and anthropology and even being critical of them and teaches ethnobotany and is also critical of ethnobotany, I go into these spaces both curious about what I love learning things, especially working with my hands, being curious about learning, but also being observant about what it is that I'm actually entering, like what culture it is that I'm actually entering into. And it is its own culture, that sees itself in a certain way. And there's definitely aspects of this culture of these gatherings where people are sharing skills, primarily what people are considering nature connection or land-based skills or ancestral skills, or primitive is a word that I maybe don't think should be used anymore. Primitive skills. And this idea that like the world's going a certain way, and so reclaiming practices that are more in connection to landscapes is going to be a part of what needs to heal what's happening in the world or whatever. But there is a lot of in it that I think too is a strange kind of cosplay identity work, like being attached to like the mountain man, like fur trappers that like went across Manifest Destiny, like went across Turtle Island, and like that era and that identity. There's like so much, it's like so many different kind of groups of people who are involved in this world that have like a story about what it is for them. And some of it is really weird to me, and some of it does feel beautiful. And I guess you spoke to it a little bit, like accessibility. I mean, and it's crazy to talk to people at the gatherings and be like, hey, like, how can we make these spaces feel safer for people other than the people that are normally coming to these? And sometimes people are just like, wait, what? Like, isn't this a really inclusive space? Like, why anybody can come, right? But they're comfortable in that space because they've been used to it, and they identify it like they've been a part of it, and like they kind of know how it functions, and it is made for them to feel most comfortable. And they don't realize that when other people come, it feels very different. And it's hard to see outside of that. And I guess so what I wanted to ask you about is, like, we met at one of these gatherings and you attend them despite the complexity of what these spaces are. And I guess I'd be curious if you could speak to what you feel like these spaces could improve on in their accessibility, sensitivity, and awareness of like how they're not really that welcoming for people of color or like people who aren't white, even though there might be people within those spaces that say, oh, of course they're welcome, but not really realizing what it means to create that. But yeah, like what more would you want to say about all of that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. And first, I want to say that I also enter these spaces as an anthropologist. just and and part of it is because even my work, right? The way I frame all of my work is it's about returning to our ancestral self, which is our free self and our connected with all of life and ancestors and our in our inner divinity, whatever we want to call it, right? Like that the pulse of life that wants to move through us being just completely natural, it when allowed. So for me, one of the things that I do find very beautiful at the gatherings is there's a lot of parents who are intentionally raising their children outside of society. And I've, as my own personal little anthropologist self, as doing participant observation research, you know, I like to see what children are like when they don't have all of those layers. And I know even from my own children, right? Like that kind of not good enough, they don't experience it in the same way. Or, they just know they're lovable. They know they're loved. They know they belong. I like to see that because it's so rare in this society. I mean, you know, schools are a whole other tangent. And I also think schools are important because some people are going to fall through the cracks. Schools saved my life, but schools are extremely problematic because they are, basically various forms of boarding school. I mean, they're all designed to prop up capitalism and settler colonialism. So anyway, you have a lot of free range kids. Sometimes that's kind of like a slightly, sometimes that can depending on who the parent is. I just want to name this so that people know I see nuance. Sometimes that can lean toward entitled, entitled children who lack social skills, right? And personal boundaries. I do want to just name that because that, like I raised my children outside of the schools, but with a lot of like ancestral responsibility, respect, kind of ways of being, right, that are part of like indigenous life ways. And I'll just say specifically coming from Mexican, my Mexican culture. But anyway, that's one big reason why I go to the gatherings is because I really like to remember those qualities of kind of like just being free inside of ourselves and supporting that in our children. That is like how what I have sought to like emulate as a parent, and also what I'm actually helping everyone to return to. Anyone I work with is we're trying to return to that who you are when you're not just, on the hamster wheel following all the dictates of domination society. So that is there at these gatherings. And that's why I'm there. Also, the gatherings are one of the main places where I can be on land, which is my love, to be on land and have my children with me, in the sense of like often I would love to be migratory like you, like, oh, you and Nikki, like, oh, I would just love to just go join you all. And and I know it's not all perfect, but I'm saying that that's part of my heart. That's my, what my soul loves is to just be on land. That's, medicine personness, whatever we want to call it, right? Like I just want to be on land, being with all of the beings and just in that deep way that I think a lot of people listening could relate to. But in daily life, I'm living more of a domesticated life as a mom, tending my children, earning a living to be able to buy them food, right? So so the gatherings are also that place where I get to, they're occupied, they're doing things that are fairly sweet, really, mostly sweet, a lot of sweet people, open-hearted people. I mean, my kids have learned a lot at the gatherings. So, and meanwhile, I can go on all the plant walks. And that's when you and I see each other, is when I'm on all the plant walks. So, so, but anyway, and it is a privileged space. And one of the ways that I've made peace with it for myself is because when I'm there, I really am there learning, remembering, so that I can bring that back to my community, right? So like here in Southern Oregon, I'm very connected with the migrant community, which is essentially my community. I'm the daughter of a Mexican immigrant. And even though I'm new to this particular community, it's my heart community. And so when I go into this space that is a privileged space and is challenging to be in, because there's all kinds of microaggressions, and because I'm, light skinned Mexican or white presenting, I unfortunately often hear even more of the racism because there are things that people will say to me, not thinking because they, think I'm quote one of them, right? And
Mm.
But it's not like, again, and a lot of it is not what's or what's not welcoming. It's not like people are, I mean, there are, like, depending on which gathering you're at, there are some blatantly racist people, right? But it's not really mostly that. It's mostly just cultural appropriation. It's like here's this, I mean, there's all kinds of things that people say from their place of disconnection from the wider diversity of humanity that is just kind of clueless and um and can really make you feel othered, and one of the things, and here's what's cool is there is one gathering. So there's many gatherings that really do not have an eye to inclusion. They're very unaware of the whiteness. I mean, all we have to do is look up features of whiteness and you can say all of that exists at the gatherings, because who can be at these gatherings? It's often, and I want to clarify something too, because at the gatherings are a white space, and sometimes people will point to, oh, well, look at that, Latina, or look at that, that there's one Black person here, right? Like, um, most of the time, the people of color who remain in that white space are people who are just doing the dance. It's not that it's easy. They're doing the dance like I do the dance. Like, there's all these good things here, and I'm going to deal with this BS, but I'm going to focus on the good. And there's also Stockholm syndrome. There's also people of color who quote by assimilating, and that's their path. I have that in my own family, people who are quoting by assimilating. I mean, people who voted for Trump. Okay. Like, um, so I just want to name that because sometimes that limits inclusion efforts, because people say we're diverse. And it's like, well, that I don't know that we're really diverse, because there's a lot, like one of the gatherings, and I really don't want to name the gatherings, but you and I were at this gathering together, and it was a very heavy gathering for me, and I couldn't really enjoy myself because the whiteness is so strong, and people kind of doubled down on, we're not going to ruffle any feathers. We're not going to talk about real world reality. Then it just felt very hostile. And I knew, like any people of color I'm connected to from cities, activist spaces, but even just like very marginalized people would not feel safe there. And what tends to happen if you don't end up making the decision to navigate all the BS, for the good stuff, right? So you can enjoy the good stuff. Most people of color, and especially activists, are not going to stay. They're going to leave. And, they'll go 1 year and they won't come the next year. I want to name the difference because I feel like it's always good to like focus on, right? Like the regenerative, examples of what's possible. So, and it's interesting because this other gathering that I go to, and I will name this one Buckeye, is being far more intentional about being inclusive. Okay. And there's a lot of messiness, and there's people, when you say Buckeye, there's people who
they roll their eyes.
Yeah, they roll their eyes because, partly, and I understand this, and this is where I kind of end up being like a bridge person because I'm a Gemini. That's one reason. But but the other thing is because I am a white passing Latina, and I've lived in suburban space. I've been now in my adulthood, I've been around privileged people, but I also, right, and inside of me, I'm a little vagabond orphan. So, and I'm very connected to marginalized community. And so I can see all sides. I can see like why someone's going to roll their eyes because they have been able to live outside of, some of these oppressions that people are responding to. And they're, just wanting to have their party. They're wanting to have their good time. Oh, that's something I want to say. These gatherings, I mean, these gatherings are actually family reunions that charge admission to a certain number of people to come and join them. Okay. But in general, anytime you go to a gathering, you're going to a family reunion. And that's why, you're picking up on that. You're naming, oh, this one has this culture and that one has that culture, because they're all family reunions. And that's fine. But some people are not going to want to come to your reunion, if you want it to just be a party for you and yours. So it's confusing if you're inviting other people. Like if this is the, conservative mountain man family reunion, okay, maybe do that. But if you invite other people, then there's an equity issue. Then there's an inclusion issue, and you can choose to not care about it, that's, but that's basically what's happening is unless you are part of, I mean, it's just the fact that people who are doing ancestral skills are largely living outside of society, which is both beautiful and there's a lot that they don't know. So that then when someone comes in and says, hey, we have to actually address inclusion here, they feel talked to, and they're people who actually left that. They didn't want any kind of authoritarian input, right? So like, I understand it. I understand when somebody says, what's a BIPOC? And some people, some activists will get really upset. Like, what? They don't even know what BIPOC is. I don't get upset. I say, well, of course they don't know. They've been choosing to be outside of society. I can respect that. But if you want to say that you're about nature connection and ancestral ways, that involves all of human diversity. And there are barriers. There are actual legit barriers. And if we're not addressing those, that's not anyone controlling you. That's just saying, hey, listen, you want to have a true experience of nature. Let's bring all of nature in. So then there has to be some shifting around, how you structure something or what you allow. I mean, there's a whole other level of the sexism and the predatory nature of males in these gatherings, right? And that's a whole other thing that, is like there's elders, quote unquote elders. I don't call them elders because if you have a dirty old white man, that's not an elder. But oh, they're elders and they've been part of this gathering forever. So if you want to have a family reunion and invite other people to your family reunion, but you're not willing to talk to, creepy uncle, then that family reunion is not a safe place for some people. And in order to make it a safe place and to really be welcoming, some things have to change. But I don't actually expect some of these gatherings to change. It just helps me to see as like what they are. But anyway, I do want to just name that at Buckeye, inclusion has ruffled feathers, but at the same time, what happened this year was we held a BIPOC sanctuary. And again, that's, some people don't like that. Even activists don't like that. Some, even, some people of color, some BIPOC don't like the idea of a BIPOC sanctuary because they feel like it's separation oriented. And those are all the nuances that we were navigating and having conversations around. But what actually happened, this is just what I want to name as a seed, is we created a nest. Every other group that comes to that gathering has a nest. They have their people that they know. Hey, they have they know what it looks like to camp. They know what you need, right? Marginalized people in our BIPOC circle. On the first day we did land tending, there were people who didn't want to sit down because they were afraid of ticks, because that's what it is to be trapped in a city. You have been, kind of scared away from nature. And there were people who didn't have the right, camping equipment. Like they were cold, so we helped them, right? We just created a nest, and there was like a little family feeling, and we lit a fire, people took over the fire, and then it just became like this little safe space where people who don't normally have access to these types of gatherings and this way of being, like camping, could come in and get help, could come and make their coffee. And then what it did was support them, like also have a space to like debrief. It feels really good to go back to a tent where other people can understand, and you can cry together or you can laugh together, right? That's just what everyone is doing who has their own little nest, their own little group that they come to the gathering with. And that is really there. And so, I had many conversations with people who were saying, well, this is very separation oriented. But by the time I kind of explained, like, it's just creating a nest so that now 30 people of color who felt like they couldn't come to gatherings because it was too much, too many microaggressions, like, and too much feeling out of place. Like now they have a little nest they can go decompress in, and then they go out, and now they can be at this gathering, and now this gathering can have 30 more people of color. And many of them said, next year I'm gonna bring my friends, because now there's a safe space for me, right? So, and now we're actually doing nature connection, because now we're actually bringing people from all of life experiences and all of, ancestral lines together. Like then, right? That's when we really can be learning and reconnecting. Anyway, that's my rant.
It's so interesting when people make spaces for themselves to gather, like, say, women's only spaces or queer only spaces. I think people have started to accept when people create women only spaces that it is okay, that's where the women, like the men, so-called, don't always feel like threatened by it. They're like, okay, let them go have their space. But it's interesting in another context, like my friend wanted to teach a women's archery class at one of these gatherings, and which usually, this is just the reality, is that there's men teaching this, and then the students are all different people, children, men, women, anybody in between. Usually it's a man teaching it, and of course they're including whoever, but this person felt like it could be nice to have a women's only archery space so that women can teach each other in a space that's usually like male. The space is held by men. And she encountered a lot of pushback from some of the old school kind of teachers, especially a handful of specific teachers who were interested in that skill, and said that they felt like they were being excluded, and that she didn't know what she was doing, and that they needed that she needed that him to be there to make sure no one got hurt, or that he was the one that knew and I was like, wow, like how, like, and it was so just mad about the space and that she wanted to create this space. So it's interesting, like, why is it that we can't trust people to create the spaces they want for themselves, you know? And I think then with like spaces where people of color can be in their own, that where's that resistance coming from for people like who don't get to be there, like because they're used to getting to be everywhere if they want, you know, like that why do you need to be in that space too? Like like what is it that's not about you? It's about other people getting to have the space they want for themselves and creating that because that's what they want, you know? And I think that kind of resistance is just the somatic work that I think is part of the whole decolonization process too. It's like, okay, we can do that. We can work on these reactions that then can actually make things a lot easier. Because it's like, that's a small change that makes a big impact, that it just takes people doing work on in their inner body landscape in order to like make it feel good to create these, you know, like instead of making it a big deal that the space exists, do the work to like feel good about other people making space for themselves, you know, like it could be as simple as that, as one step, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just depends on people's level of openness. I mean, some people are going to feel threatened. They're going to feel fearful. They're going to contract, right? That's the body state. They're going to contract. They're going to judge. They're going to, shame. They're going to defend. They're going to feel attacked, right? All of that is just, again, survival stuff. That's survival programming. Some people are more empathic, like just biologically, bottom line. Some people are more empathic than others. So it's going to depend on so many pieces, right? If you're kind of a more naturally empathic, curious person, or if you're a thicker skinned person, that's going to be a little like, I dealt with it, they should deal with it, I mean, and that can come from BIPOC also. So, so it just all depends. And again, it just points to like, it actually, we can step back and be like, you know what, it's all okay, because this is just humans being diverse. And I really believe that what's life-giving is going to emerge, and that happened, at this other gathering that we have been together at, but you weren't there this time. But this time it was kind of interesting because there wasn't an official BIPOC sanctuary, but because people know like who I am, or what I hold space for, they're kind of became like this little group, this little emergent queer BIPOC space, right? And it wasn't exclusive, but it just like, we kind of had this little group. And I thought that was so sweet, like this little emergent space. And I feel like we can just trust that. We can just trust that what's emergent is gonna, keep coming forward. What's life-giving, like, right, right. We know like every little plant that grows up through the concrete, crack, or, whatever, or the hard packed desert landscape, right? Like life will keep moving. So I feel like this is just what we're seeing in these spaces. And there's all, I mean, what you're describing with your friend, I mean, that's just like, that's just, to me, generational, patriarchy, sexism, and right, there's a lot of people who've been enjoying power in these spaces. And yeah, this is asking them to let go of some power. And some people, especially in their older age, are not going to be open to that. So it just all depends on the person, but it doesn't have to stop the life-giving pulse, the movement that wants to come through. It's just kind of like the crust. It's like the crust. We have to just be like, it's been kind of crusty here for a while,
It's probably traumatizing to have to fight for that. I mean, this is where the word intersectional comes in and all of this talk. And like, I forget who it was as a Black femme person that kind of came up with that word, intersectional oppression or intersectionality. But I mean, and now people use it really regularly to try to describe these ideas of like, we all are coming together with varying forms of like privilege and oppression. And it's sometimes sort of more of a webbed, non-linear kind of thing. Like, well, you've got this and this, you got this and this, you've got that and that and that and that. And we all are meeting each other. And we have to figure out how to be in relationship to one another without being like, well, yours is worse than mine and yours is worse than mine. Of course, there are some people that are more, have to deal with more because of the way our culture is, right? Like, but it's not about saying, well, someone else's stuff is invalid just because you're getting space held, you know, like that's the common argument I hear, like, you know, well, we've been oppressed in this way, so why should we see what you got, da 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 da. And really the reaction should be, well, okay, I can empathize with you because I have my own story because of what I've gone through. So where can we meet in the middle? Where can we meet with where we both have things, and respect each other and not like devalidate someone's experience in the world? Like that's one of the biggest things I feel like I've been thinking about and learning too, is like how it's easy to just, this is gaslighting 101 too, like this word that gets thrown around so much right now. But it's true, it's just happening so much. But it's like, oh, well, your feeling about that thing is not valid. Oh, you're overreacting, or oh, you're too sensitive, or oh, like have tough skin, or oh, deal with it. And I'm just like, that's not really helping anything. It's like, what other way can we be more empathetic with each other? And so I think about this scenario, say with the archery, and I'm just like, what would be the solution to that? Like, you know, I mean, and for that person to have to like to continue to be like, no, I'm going to create this space anyways with this person who has had a lot of power, like, and is used to that and is feeling threatened now, like kind of being in an attack mode. Like it's traumatizing to us to continue to assert the right to have the space, and realize that this person's just acting from this place because of these reasons, you know. But it's like it's a lot. And like, so then add on like being a person of color in this culture, or being a queer person, or being trans, or being whatever, all the different, you know, like different ways that we all are in the world. It's like, yeah, I can't even, you know, it's like people we have, and sometimes that's the crust that you're talking about, like that we have to swim in that and figure out how to navigate it anyways, you know. And be in the body, like remember the body. Yesterday I had to like change my alternator on the side of the road while I was driving to my friend's place. And I had my own little like moment of like, okay, right, like, and I actually, my alternator went out and I ended up being able to drive right into an auto zone. It was crazy. Like my voltage was going down. I was like, uh-oh, everything's turning off. Like, and I had a feeling that's what it was. And then I was able to like pull right in, and I had to pull my emergency brake to stop. It was like crazy. And I went in and I was like, I think my alternator is out. And being a person socialized as a woman and like a femme person in this culture, like how much I've had to navigate like men talking down to me while I'm trying to do things that women or femme people are not taught or like given access to. This is just in my own intersectional example, right? Like, and I was trying to change my alternator, and in some ways, like the people around me were like, oh, you figure it out, we're not going to help you, we don't have time. And then other people could come up and be like, can I help you? And then immediately start insulting me. Men, like I had a particular, while he was helping me, and I'm like, okay, a particular instance yesterday that was pretty, I like cried a couple times during it. I was like, I just need to get out of here. Like, okay, you want to help me, you want to act like you're helpful, and that you want to make sure you tell me what you know, but you don't need to insult me while doing it. Like, there was some particular, I don't even know if I should repeat it, where like I wasn't literally strong enough to do one thing that I needed to do, and he called me like what you call weak people, like this really derogatory way of saying weak, using women's genitals, you know, that word. I was like, are you serious? Like,
Oh, goodness.
Come on, just help me. Like, or
Yeah.
like, why do you need to say that? Like
Mhm.
I'm out here trying to, it's like 90 degrees out. I'm trying to change my alternator. Like, I'm up in here doing this. Like,
Yeah.
anyways, it was just like, why is that necessary? And I experienced those kinds of things, and I'm like, it gets normalized to do that. Like, people who have these skills handed to them when they're younger, and there's the gender thing, and like, people have access to those skills, and then there is some sort of power that ends up coming out of like, well, I know this, I got access to it, and you didn't have access to it. In like, well, what is it there in that power of like having knowledge or experience? And like, I think the most radical thing, and I have a, when I was working on my trailer, building it out, I worked with a lot of different people who collaborated with me and helped me, and I learned by working with them, and I had to navigate this a lot then too. And I had one friend, I'll just say his name because it was awesome. His name is Josiah, down in the Southeast, who's like a man, cis man in this culture, but he was the easiest person to work with because I don't know, he just done the work or whatever to be aware of like what it means to be a very skilled carpenter working with a femme person who doesn't know as much. And I never felt like hierarchy. Like, we just worked together, and it was like this. Anyways, I just bring this up, and it's a tangent, but just like, as this like wraps back into this idea of like, how can we change these spaces that are white spaces, focused around skills, and make it feel more comfortable, inclusive for people who aren't white. There's a lot in all of that, navigating all of that piece of it too, is like people just shifting slightly this way. Like, it's not actually that hard sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I mean, I think that's a beautiful example because, first of all, like I could have said all of those exact words just in terms of like people knowing skills and me not knowing them, or like me as a city person, or all the BIPOC I know coming in from cities with people being like, well, I know this. How come you don't know it? I mean, that is the total vibe of these skills gatherings. Okay. Like a lot of being talked down to. And um, and the liberation or the healing of that isn't actually probably going to be changing the people who are in that mode. It's not going to be changing that guy who, even though he was helping you, is unconscious of, his programming, right? But it is really going to be the emergent people, the people coming in with regenerative desire and energy, finding that moving through them. That so Josiah, for whatever reason, is choosing to express other things. Your friend who wants to have the femme archery class, is life pulsing through her. That is the regeneration. That's the healing. And as long as we honor that, and now, your friend gets to decide, is it loving for her to do it in that space or not, right? Because maybe it becomes the class that's outside, and she gets to be fully herself. And or, I mean, this is where we all need to be tuning into our body, our heart, our belly, right? Our knowing, and opening to what is really loving, what is in my highest good, what not as that kind of external achievement oriented, what's my purpose, but just like what wants to pulse through me. Because to me, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be that. It's going to be holding. That's where the regeneration is. Like, we're not going to change people who aren't going to change. But the other thing is, I'm an old time, I like to say, like, I'm an old timer activist now. These elements, like conservative folk who are just, I mean, I like a lot of conservative folk. I'm not even saying that you have to be whatever liberal or the opposite of that. What I mean is people who want to like be in their stagnant ways, we'll say, or want to hold down a particular thing in a really kind of less empathic way. That is always going to be there. That has been there I wanted to change the world when I was 18. I want to be a senator. I went to DC. I did all these things, okay, to be to change things. And it's like really interesting for me now to just see it from an ecosystem point of view, like, the yin and the yang, like these energies have been here, they're always here. Bringing change, bringing healing is not about trying to change the yang energy. It's just about honoring your energy, honoring what wants to pulse through you, having compassion for yourself, and bringing truth and love and compassion in the face of any of that kind of shutting you down attempts, right? Anything that tries to shut your beautiful, like, spark of life, right? And just trusting that. So, and supporting that in others. So I don't think we have to focus on those guys all that much.
It's cool that you brought it to this point, because I wanted to just ask this, or like speak to this one last thing before we end the interview and the conversation. But just thinking about conflict resolution a lot lately for myself, because I've had like little things in my life that have come up. Some things are like long-term situations, and some are more recent in the past few years, where I'm having such a hard time with conflict resolution, and it really is at the heart of it like a reflection of our cultural ecosystem, and then as at our relationship with the land, and also how it translates into our relationship with ourselves and the human ecosystems, and as they like narrow in, and we like what you just spoke to, like we can't really change someone else or force them, or like try our best to make them see a different way or act a different way. They have to choose it for themselves. And no matter what we do in scenarios where fissures happen or trust breaks, or like, you as, say, someone who's felt betrayed, or you as the person that did the betraying, or like maybe it was both people did something, and in the resolution process, or in the mending process, it's often like I'm stumped at times at like what do you do next, because you can't go back, because now there's a disruption of trust, and it's not like you can demand someone to, or like say, you can put boundaries up, or you can say, you can ask for conditions, like, I guess, like for what it means to regain trust. But it feels like a mind-boggling puzzle in some ways, like, because it is such a somatic, not brain-oriented thing to regain trust with somebody, and you can't ask someone to, especially if now, like, yeah, you have the groove put in, like the groove is there. In order for the groove to be erased, in some ways, when it comes to dynamics with other humans, it's not an individual, it is part of it's an individualistic thing, part of it's what you're doing together, and then part of it's the community around you and what's happening there too, right? Like, and then of course the culture at large and bigger layers. But it's like, in some ways it is like about what the other person's doing in order for the mending between you to happen, but it's also about what you have to do for yourself. And it's something that has been difficult for me to navigate, like at what point, yeah, like what amount of it is a responsibility of the self, and what amount of it is like asking for what you really need, and like, and if that person can't do that in order to regain trust, then you have to walk away or something. Like, is that really how it has to go? Like, and there's a self-righteous, like, angry person inside of me, just like plenty of people get in the world we live in, where like sometimes it's a justified reaction or like emotion. It feels weird because anger can feel like such a shameful emotion, that being in a dominating culture where your boundaries are not being respected, or your like sacredness and your sovereignty as a beautiful human being in this world is not being respected, and you're wanting to shift and change that, just like the person with the archery, right? Like, or creating the BIPOC space at Buckeye. It's like we want to shift and change that, but it feels like so crusty to do that. And like in conflict resolution, these are the ecosystem spaces that we can just make choices that do feel uncomfortable, and ask ourselves what is about our culture that's telling us to act a certain way right here, and what about it is something that we're coming at from right here, and what does it mean to move forward. I guess I don't know what I'm officially asking, other than like, what do you feel about like conflict resolution in this new world we're trying to create, that's shifting away from dominant culture? Because it is hard for me to sift through what the right thing is to do sometimes with all of what's out here, because some people are like, fuck those men, like, or yeah, whatever, like, just really like, no, like, and then in other places it's like, well, there's having compassion for what the process is like, and that we all have harm happening and we all have to navigate that. But at what point, yeah, like wanting to be fierce but also wanting to be soft at the same time. And then of course we just want to be soft. Like I really just want to be soft all the time, but I'm not that child that was just like open. It almost can't always just be soft, because like, yeah, like I guess remaining soft despite having so much coming at you is probably the magic. Like what is that, so anyways, that's kind of a lot, but I just curious, like conflict resolution in this era. And I'm asking for myself, but also asking for lots of us that are navigating conflict right now and just feeling like it's so difficult it feels like trudging through mud sometimes, like wanting resolution, but it feeling impossible,
Yeah. That is a lot. And we could talk a whole 2 more hours on that.
I know.
But I will say what I'm hearing, like the kind of through line is, yeah, there's a lot to feel outrage about. And righteous outrage is different than wounded anger or blaming anger or victim-y anger. Righteous outrage is like, this is not okay. If you feel this is not okay about patriarchy, sexism, or blah, 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 white supremacy, all those things, that's healthy. Okay. And unfortunately, though, we can't change it. We if we could, we'd wave the magic wand, but we can't. So what we can do that's helpful, more helpful, is to drop into our feelings of grief and helplessness around it. Mm-hmm. So validating, like, oh, our clear seeing, this is righteous outrage. This because I see clearly that this is not okay. And I'm helpless over it. I'm helpless over it systemically. I'm helpless over it in the other person. And whether or not I'm going to engage with someone, depending on, usually it's, usually we would speak specifically about a specific situation, and I would help somebody move, unpack what is loving for them. But I'll just speak to generalities, like in terms of trusting other people when everybody is being impacted and shaped, and behavior is normalized and acceptable depending on who you are. If you're male or femme, or, all kinds, white or BIPOC, right? Like there's all kinds of privileges. And I like to just kind of call it like the inner colonizer, because the inner colonizer is, there's an owning class inner colonizer, and there's a, quote, low caste inner colonizer. And it's just everyone navigating living from that place versus living from their true self. Okay, so when we're in relationship with somebody else, first of all, trust, and whether or not we can trust somebody does still, in my realm, land on whether or not my little girl, my inner child, can trust me to take care of her in the face of anything that happens in the relationship. Okay, so anytime I'm engaging in a relationship, I'm still holding myself. I'm still the primary keeper of my soul. And I'm engaging with the other person, not to get love, but to share love. Okay. And so conflict, if that person becomes untrustworthy, then I could, if I'm really open to learning and I want to know what that's about for them, what's getting triggered, I could be, if I'm holding myself and not handing myself to them, right? If I'm holding myself and I know I'm okay no matter what, then I can engage in like a curious conversation. I can explore it. It's helped me to understand. But but the only way to be clean about that and not have expectations, not like want them to be a certain way, right? Want them to be further along on their path, want them to not be shaped by all these, domination systems, right? Like if I have attachment, then that's where I'm putting my eyes on them too much. And it's just a moment where I have to remember to come back here. So to myself, right? To the safety, the only place of true safety is inside. And that's not, unfortunately, it sounds like an individualistic thing, but it's actually just dealing with our modern reality. Like we don't have that village, you know. It's like our first, anyway, gosh, there's so much. There are way too many tangents here, okay, that I could go on. So I'm just gonna say the fact is we live in fragmented society and we're all pulling pieces together. And if you had the village, the actual village that was held together by many generations of holding that village together, and let's just be clear, it would not be perfect. There's a lot of things, interfamily, familial things, a lot of sexism, incest, I'm just saying, I don't want to ever idealize these situations. But the fact is, if you had like a place of belonging, a little community, yeah, like all mammals, we go to our herd. We seek safety. We tend to, before fight, flight, freeze, we tend and befriend, right? But if that still involves being the keeper of your soul, because if you were allowed to like live the way, emerge as that supported little flower or plant or animal that you are, I'm just using that as metaphor, right? Like you would just be who you are. You would be essentially the keeper of your soul. You're not looking out there. Okay. So that, anyway, I just want to know that's where true trust and true safety are. And when we're engaging with someone else, it really helps to be holding on to ourselves, because then we can truly be curious and compassionate for ourselves and for them. And we can say, oh, like it's possible actually to be in relationship with someone who you don't feel like you can trust 100%, but you love certain things about them and they bring value to your life. But yeah, they're not someone you can hand your little girl to. And I'm using, little girl, your inner child, your true self, all kinds of ways to say it. But that doesn't make them someone that you need to not be in relationship with, because we're all navigating the, effed upness of like this reality. I mean, there is so much disconnection. There's so much forgetting of what's truly loving and human, reciprocal. So I'm just sitting with, if there's any, I really, we could go, I really, really could go on a lot of tangents, but I would just say that when we have conflict with another, it's really important to look at, where our place of power is. Okay. Because we can if we are engaging in any way in blaming or judging the other person, that's our inner colonizer. That's not our loving heart. Okay. And we're going to do that because that's the sea we're swimming in. Okay. But it's just not where we want to be as a human. Right. So anytime, this is something I would just say for everybody, save yourself a lot of hassle. And if you have a conflict and what wants to come out of your mouth is blaming, judging, or shaming the other, don't engage. Just, it's okay. It's okay that you have those feelings. You're not a bad person, again, because that's your survival self getting activated. You might even have trauma, but don't engage from that place. That's what I tell all the couples I work with.
It's pretty hard, like, especially if you feel like someone treated you like out of the dominant culture in a certain way, and you want to defend that inner child. That the blaming and shaming is pretty hard not to do. But
see, that's different. Like speaking up for yourself, speaking your truth is actually different. Like from a sense of righteous outrage or knowing or just clear seeing of justice, of truth, like, no, you can't treat me that way. No, I will not be treated that way. Again, it's, iMessages are helpful because, I mean, a true boundary is not what you're telling someone else to do for you because you can't control the other person. It's what I will do to take care of myself. If you speak to me that way, I will leave, right? So there's definitely room for speaking your truth, but that's different than I just want to tell you how wrong you are. Right? It's like a speaking of truth is just like truth, and then you walk away because that, we're simplifying it right now in this moment. This is, anybody who's struggling with this probably should talk to someone about it, but in general, that's an important clarification. There's room for boundaries. There's room for speaking your truth. That's different than making the other person the whole problem and forgetting that there are things you can do to take care of yourself in that moment as the keeper of your soul. Mm-hmm. And that's just where your power is, right? It's like your friend with the archery can choose to keep engaging because that can be what feels loving to her. Keep engaging, keep holding fast. Or she can choose to go create her own thing. And only she knows what's actually her truth. But that's where the focus is. It's not on the guy. It's not on the other person. It's what's
changing them. Yeah.
It's just kind of like an energy question, honestly. It really is. It's very draining to try to control another person. It's far more life-giving and loving to focus on what, how we can support ourselves. This is where a lot of, anyway, kind of just embracing your joy in the moment is also really important, right? Like embracing what's nourishing for you and really going for it.
Totally. Well, I think that's probably should wrap up with that. And yeah, of course we could go on about many of these tangents. I know I brought up a big question here at the end. But I was really curious, like at least some of what you would say to that in the time that we have left. But yeah, if people wanted to find you online and reach out to you to see your work or like work with you in some way, what's the best way people can find you online?
Yeah, my website's just connectingwithin.com. And I really recommend if anyone, resonated with me and they want to learn more, to read my blog. I have a lot of opinions. and it's part memoir, but also part just my ponderings. And it's not complicated at all, but it just would give you a sense of, of who I am and my approach. And I think I had given you the link to one particular blog that I wrote called Proximity as a Path to Interdependence. because that's really what it's all about to me. It's all about coming back into relationship with each other.
Yeah, we'll put that one in the show notes, links and stuff.
Yeah.
And the website too. Well, that's on the website, but we'll put both on there.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes people go to my website and they don't know I have a blog. And I don't really keep up. I try to be as unplugged as I can, except for when I'm talking to cool people like you by Zoom. But so my website, doesn't get updated that much. So my blog is what actually, I don't write a ton, but it's just like where people can maybe hear my heart more.
You're not making memes on Instagram and posting them every day.
No, I stay away from all of that. All of that. I'm not trying to build an empire.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time to chat with me this morning, and that we found a time in our busy lives to connect, and I really appreciated speaking to you today and look forward to sharing it with everybody.
Yeah, I look forward to hearing what you spliced together.
Hey y'all, thanks so much for listening to this conversation with Sylvia. I really hope you enjoyed it. I am gonna put links in the show notes to her website and a couple resources that we mention in this episode. So go there if you want to explore more, and also support the podcast through Substack, Patreon, Venmo. I'm also going to include the link I have to my bookshop account where you can buy me a book if you want. I always am buying books and reading more books, and that's a cool way you can support me if you want to buy me a particular book that you think is interesting, and it will be sent to me and I won't know who bought it. It's really cool. And also just wanted to shout out again, the music for this podcast episode is all from Leela Downs. Really appreciate the ability to use this music on the podcast, and highly recommend downloading and listening to her album Border, and that's where all this music comes from. And I will also have that in the show notes, a link to that album where these 3 songs come from. The one at the very beginning, then there was another one near the beginning, and then this last one that you're about to listen to as we move out of this conversation. So thanks again for listening, and I will be putting out another episode super soon. I have a big queue of conversations waiting, ready to go. I just need to get through the editing process with them. So there won't be that much time between this one and the next. So thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, y'all.
It's a mighty long road that my poor hands have hoed. My poor feet have traveled a long dusty road. Out of your dust bowl and westward we rode. Your deserts was hot and your mountains was cold. I worked on your orchards of peaches and prunes, slept on the ground by the light of your moon. At the edge of your cities you will see us, and then we come with the dust and we're gone with the wind. California, Arizona, I made all your crops, but it's north up to Oregon to harvest your hops. Dig the bees from the ground, pick the grapes from your vines, to set on your table your light sparkling wine. When did you come to America the free? Who are your ancestors? What is your creed? Who is the Father and the Son and the we? Where is the spirit that sought liberty? When did you come to America? America. Long, long before when the buffalo walked. When did your hands burn like coals? The thing that made this land your pride and your joy. When did you come to America? I came to help you grow, to harvest your crops. I came to build your roads, your cities and your thoughts. Say you don't need me, but you know what you've got. This land is your land and my land and your land. From California to the New York Islands. This land is my land and your land and my land. From California to the New York Islands. This land is my land and your land and my land. From California to the New York Islands. This land is my land and your land and my land and your land too. Say you're American, but what does it mean? You are the particle, the dust in the scheme. Now that you have all the things that you want, did you ever look around to see who you forgot? When did you come to America? Garden of Eden, Garden of Rush. Blank hearts, the comforts, the dream for what we fought. The crossroads is here now. We forget our debt too much. I really don't know who I am, but I will. I know there's a purpose, there's a reason for me to be here. Dust is to dust, heavy memory. Even if they grind